Is there anyone from MHTV that needs me to allow them to record? Don't see anyone from MHTV, and I don't have anyone raising their hand, so we are live on YouTube. So that piece is up and running, and I will call this meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. First up is a statement for myself. It's been 2 weeks since we were rocked by the tragic death of James Galante. We continue to extend our deepest condolences to his family and friends. And I also want to acknowledge the loss this has been for so many in our tight-knit community. The ripple effects of a life boldly lived have left very few of us untouched. I want to thank everyone in the Marblehead Public Schools who has offered support during this difficult time. First and foremost, our district support staff, administration, and teachers. It is an incredibly difficult job to support others' grief while you yourself are grieving, and you have all done this with grace. I also want to thank other communities and individuals who brought therapy dogs to the high school, restaurants, and others who donated food to those supporting our students, the PCO, area schools who brought the high school teachers breakfast and other treats this week and last, and the YMCA for allowing our students to use their facilities free of charge this past weekend. No one should grieve alone, and all of these offerings of support have allowed people to be together in community to start the healing process. I hope I have not forgotten anyone in this list, and I apologize if I have. I think to many, this has felt like the cruelest loss in a long stream of losses over the last 2 years. There's been a feeling of existential exhaustion as we have tried to find ways to process and move forward. I lamented to a friend that I don't know how to help kids thrive when bad things keep happening. But she reminded me the resilience is paramount, and our kids will continue to build and rely on it. She then reminded me of the tree that has grown up and through a jagged chain link fence, knotted and bent in places, but its branches reaching for the sky, beautifully perfect and strong. I'll leave you with that image of comfort and growth, as well as with the encouragement to continue to support one another and reach out if you also need support. With that, I will officially open our budget public hearing on the FY23 school budget at 7:03 p.m. The budget process is a long one. It's the task of the superintendent and his administration to bring forward a budget to the school committee. The budget technically remains the superintendent's until it is voted by the school committee. Although the school committee has a very solid working knowledge of the budget, it currently remains in the hands of the superintendent. Tonight, we've moved one very important step closer to the school committee budget vote. The budget hearing is for the superintendent to present his budget to the community and for the community to weigh in and ask questions. The superintendent and his administration will address these questions and comments as needed. The school committee is here to listen to community feedback, and we will deliberate and vote the budget at our next meeting next week, Thursday, April 7th. We welcome feedback during the coming week as well. After the approval of the budget, it officially becomes the school committee's budget to continue to communicate to the public. John, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the kind statement. To begin, it has been a really difficult 2 weeks. I want to thank members of the leadership team who are here this evening. I will go through the budget presentation, and then we will open it up for questions or input. And if there are questions specific to a department or a school, I will make them available to answer that question. So start the slideshow. Can everybody see that?
Not yet. Nope. Are you sharing it on from your computer?
I am.
Try to share it from mine?
Sure.
Okay.
Go up to the top,
Yeah.
hit slideshow. All right, it's my pleasure tonight to present the FY23 operating budget. Slide, please. Stealing a phrase from Bill McAuliffe, this has been an iterative process, and it continues to be, as you'll hear later on. Things changed even as recently as today at our facility subcommittee meeting. This process this year started earlier. I was looking at the tracking sheet, and it was a December date. And as I said at that December meeting, this budget is not a holiday wish list. These are needs of the public schools in order for us to provide an exemplary education. Different for the FY23 budget process this year were public listening sessions, where we hosted 2 opportunities prior to launching the budget request for the public to provide input. It has been continuously evolving under 2 different town administrators, with the budget subcommittee, with the finance joint budget subcommittee, and it has undergone multiple reviews. The leadership team has been asked to present in a workshop format to the school committee. They took your feedback, made adjustments to requests. Again, the budget subcommittee, the joint, and then at numerous school committee meetings, the budget has been discussed. So this is open, honest, as transparent as a budget has ever been, perhaps presented in Marblehead. All of the budget requests that you will see are connected to our strategic plan. And maybe that's an omission on my part that I don't just blatantly call it a strategic plan, but our planning for success document is a 5-year roadmap for the district. And so this budget is aligned, and you saw that at the workshops when principals and directors presented that they aligned to the objectives of the district. And so from the original proposed to the final approval, which Sarah indicated you guys will do next week, you will see the budget that I'm proposing this evening. We started back in October, November. Next slide, please. No worries.
There you go.
With our budget directives, and certainly top of the budget directives are to meet our contractual obligations, step lanes. We were looking to revise the paraprofessional and tutor contracts since we're going into collective bargaining next year with all of our unions. We will look at the tutors and paraprofessionals then. We do have the stipend review committee that is up and meeting. It meets every Thursday, looking at athletic stipends, co-curricular stipends, teacher leaders, and so that work is ongoing. At one point, we were talking about an extension of the school day, and again, going into collective bargaining next year. It is probably better during that conversation than as part of the 2023 budget process. Consider offering full-day kindergarten, which is reflected in this budget. Special education, you see reflected in this budget. We had a transportation audit and a review of our services, which will be presented at the April 7th meeting. Technology is heavily addressed in the FY23 budget, including the addition of an integration specialist. Curriculum is addressed in the FY23 budget. Curriculum coaches or specialist positions, part of that is exploring the stipend work. We currently spend $175,000 on teacher leaders. Those are about 5,600, and their primary purpose is curriculum work. And so we're going to do some work over the summer with the teacher leaders, doing some training to have them more involved in curriculum work. Review our social studies and science curricula and develop a K-12 STEAM curriculum. And you see that reflected in the budget, the addition of positions and the request for resources for STEAM. Central office, the shared assistant principal for Brown and Glover, that is reflected in this budget. And then facilities maintenance. Again, I said we had a facility subcommittee meeting today, and I'm confident that facilities maintenance is also will be reflected in the capital ask and or the operating budget for FY23. Next slide, please. As I said, our strategic plan, the NPS success plan, is a 5-year plan outlook. That was an inclusive process as well, engaging the community and all of our stakeholder groups. And so each of the budget requests in FY23 are aligned to the strategic plan, the initiatives, the objectives. I reached out to Dr. Gilbert today, who facilitated our strategic planning process, to make sure that we had not missed anything in terms of the budgeting process and alignment. And she says she's not sure how you could forecast a 5-year budget through the strategic plan, and that the action plans at each year are what drive the budget request. And we have identified those in the FY23 budget. Next slide, please. So you see before you the tracking sheet, and that is up to date, including the security cameras as the last thing that was a change to the overall budget. Next slide, please. And so, as you've heard throughout the process, we have categories of requests in this budget. And so safety is a primary category. The one-time costs for safety, $343,000, and then the recurring costs are $32,000. Later on in this presentation, all of these requests are broken down in slides that are called what, and the what is the request and why we're asking for it, and why it's essential to efficient operations for an exemplary education. Next slide, please. So technology, update there. The town has included to put the purchase of the smart panels for the 4 schools. We're fortunate to have the smart panels at the Brown School, because Stephen Quietek was hired just in the nick of time as that technology was being installed in this building. And so that will be a town warrant article for the purchase of the smart panels. The one-time costs in technology are $21,000 with $35,000 in recurring costs. And again, in those what and why slides are detailed explanations of that. Next slide, please. Personnel, we are proposing a significant addition to personnel, everything from bus drivers, custodians, to an attendance clerk, permanent subs in each of the buildings, the math specialist position, the STEAM teachers, college and career assistant, some groundskeeper maintenance that did not make the FY22 budget, the DEI position, and then also in there are the stipend increases for FY23. Next slide. There are a number of curriculum asks that go everywhere from athletic contracted services increase to science supplies at the different schools. I was at the Veterans School today in the science lab, and as you'll see in the what and why slides, Mr. Fox did a nice job of capturing some images of outdated equipment, and they were doing a really interesting lab, and he posed to the students, he said, how cool would it be to have centrifuges for this lab? And of course, every hand went up. What 8th grader doesn't want to have a centrifuge to work with? And of course, he said, well, that's in the budget request. So it's gratifying to be out in the schools and to see that these requests are student facing and what our students need for an exemplary education. Next slide, please. Just continue to ask in the curriculum bucket, as we've come to call it. And those one-time costs are $184,564, and the recurring costs of $70,341. Next slide. We are proposing tuition-free kindergarten. We're one of fewer than 10 districts in the Commonwealth that are still charging families for full-day kindergarten. And that would be a recurring cost of $375. Next slide. Student services. Town has proposed funding this at the Finance Committee meeting on Monday. And that was information that we got on Monday, that they would be able to cover the $848,000 as part of the FY23 budget.
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Oh.
And so there you have like a single slide, look at a glance. I'm trying to provide the information in as many forms. And again, as it is an iterative process, these numbers change and are ever evolving. But this is each of the buckets and what is a one-time cost and what would be a recurring cost. As we move into the next series of slides, are those what and why. And I won't read each of them to you. These were posted 48 hours in advance of the meeting, but it gives you an opportunity in narrative and sometimes in image of why these requests are being put forward. So we have the assistant principal at Brown, the permanent substitutes, the transfer of a paraprofessional to a tutor position at the Glover, the STEAM teacher at Glover School. Brian had requested an increase of his teacher leaders. And again, those are the curriculum supports that each of the buildings has. And he's asked that to go from 3 to 5. So there is support for curriculum leadership in the requests. Asked for an increase in professional development. Their software budget, an increase of $2,700, and then the addition of the 2 permanent substitutes. As we move to the village school, they have asked for 3 permanent substitutes, which makes sense because they have the 3 grades. The math tutor, an increase of a math tutor position at village. The STEAM teacher, Mandy has provided you a picture of the underutilized makerspace that they have in the building. Some science supplies to be able to complete their FOSS science kits. Some world language supplies, some ELA supplies. I was talking to Mandy during our instructional rounds this week, and she said, I sent people out to take these pictures, and she said, nothing is more emblematic than empty bookshelves of the need for those ELA supplies. Some fine arts supplies so they can update their music and art supplies. Village is asking for some library increases as well. Social studies materials at Village, instructional software. And again, I'm not going into the why, but that information is available, and I'm happy to circle back to it if there are questions specific to it. Some new technology equipment at Village. Move to the middle school. You can see that Mr. Fox has taken a picture of some equipment. The hot plate has MMS from when the middle school was still located in the Village School building. And so again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. The middle school is also asking, next slide please, for some additions to their English supplies, to make available to teachers some subscriptions. And I do think it's important as a side note in the public budget hearing to say the budget is also driven by teacher voice. Teachers have input with their principals before they come to meet with Michelle and me to put forward budget requests. And so through teachers and through teacher leaders, building principals get input from faculty and staff about the needs. So I really do believe this is a needs-based budget, and I have circled back to building principals and directors when questions are raised that maybe certain things are not included that people wanted. Of course, in any budget, there will be requests that aren't put forward, but in this budget, I really do feel like teacher voice is represented. Next slide. Some world language supplies and materials at the middle school. Fine art supplies and equipment, and Mr. Fox has learned what a pug mill is, and that if I've taken a takeaway from the FY23 budget conversations, I now know what a pug mill is for the art studio at the middle school. Next slide. Engineering supplies, some physical education equipment, and some music equipment. We move on to the high school. If there is one piece of the budget that says the request that really captures the need is a world cultures book at our high school that is over 20 years old, that does not include major events like September 11th, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that $20,000 request for social studies materials, I think, tells us this is a needs-based budget. Visual arts at the high school, there are some materials that are still in our art studios from when the new high school, as some people in town still call it, opened back in 2001. Some woodshop equipment. Dan has captured the dust collector and the need for that $14,695 request. Again, some science equipment at the high school. Instructional software for the Magic Block. You heard Dan present the high school schedule, and so this will be an important piece for him as he's scheduling the Magic Block. Some audio visual equipment, and that picture says it all for me. The director of school counseling, and that's a critical position for Dan. And coming through the last 2 weeks, the support staff at the high school and across the district, but certainly focused on the high school this last week. Having this position, I would agree with him, is critical. The permanent substitutes also at the high school. The college and career assistant, the attendance clerk, which is something that the high school had previously and really does help the efficiency of the main office. Front desk monitor. Every time I go over to Danvers High School for superintendent's meeting, there is that front desk person with the sign-in software, which is also in this budget, that increases safety and security for the building. He's looking at operating line increases for multiple areas of the high school, from student activities, transportation, to professional membership dues and athletics. We move on to technology at the 4 schools. We are very grateful that town is putting that in a capital article. The security cameras, which because we cannot pinpoint the life expectancy of that, will not go on a town warrant article. So that is in our operating budget for $355,000. I think it goes without too much explanation, the value of these security features for this budget. The security card swipe system, the high school is asking for an additional access point for $8,000. The technology integration specialist, again, this supports students and teachers as we invest in all of this enhancements to software and hardware and distance learning. Having someone to support teachers in the classroom for integrating this into curriculum and instruction is an important piece. And we saw that this year with the integration specialist that was added in the FY22 budget, and fully support one for FY23. The STEAM cards, we are going to have STEAM teachers, so we need some curricular materials, and then the professional development for staff in order to implement those in the classroom. The math specialist, you can see that the math specialist that we added as part of the FY22 budget has been a tremendous value add as we have a new math curricula and supporting teachers in implementing that. So an additional math specialist to support curriculum in instruction. I'll move quickly through these. We continue to look for bus drivers, and so we've put an additional bus driver in this budget in hopes that we can have all of the buses that we currently have in our fleet running. The groundskeeper position, some additional custodians that were also things that did not make the FY22 budget. the out-of-district tuition piece, which we have spoken about in terms of the town offering to fund that, and the out-of-district transportation costs. Our Director of Equity and Inclusion, we've talked a good deal about that, and I fully support that as a budget request for the FY23 budget. Our free full-day kindergarten, we've discussed the visitor security software, which will be part of that front vestibule person that Dan is requesting in his budget. Some signature software for the HR department and a number of our departments. Our reliance on paper and pencil and triplicate forms and multiple handoffs on everything from timesheets to approvals, having some updates in technology and the ability to do these things online rather than paper and pencil will increase efficiency and has the potential to reduce costs as well. The HR generalist position would support the HR position that we added as part of the FY23 budget. And then a request by the town in that we're requesting a significant addition in the number of personnel in this budget, that we would put the benefits costs as a request in the operating budget for FY23. So ESSER funding, I think this was added later, but often people have asked about, well, didn't the schools get millions of dollars of funding? If you see there at the bottom, the total is 1.2. So that's not exactly millions. And much of our ESSER funding went to just being able to keep the schools operating, where we were at one point, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, spending $10,000 a week on cleaning when we thought that that was necessary for PPE. Each teacher got a laptop through this funding. And so I just put that piece in there so people could see that is part of our funding sources for the district. Next slide. Questions or comments? I'm going to jump past this slide because we added some addenda just because I thought that it was important for people to see. There are other funds in the operating budget in terms of grants and revolvers, in addition to the capital requests that we made. So next slide. These were our capital requests. And if it says town warrant article, town has informed us that they will put these forward as warrant article requests with other town departments. And so the fire alarm panel, the roof at the high school, the roof at the middle school, the boilers, the HVAC computer controls. There's some question on the HVAC units that we're waiting to hear back if that is also included. The next slide, the last two on this and the next slide are things that they have not indicated. We do have a warrant article for capital at the facilities subcommittee meeting today. There was conversation about rolling these remaining requests into the operating budget. That would be a decision of the school committee and the facilities subcommittee. I anticipate we'll present that to the full school committee, but there is a remaining balance or that has not been captured of $586,407, whether we put that on the warrant or we put it as part of the operating budget, but it was a unanimous vote for the facility subcommittee today to put that forward as an operating request. The next slide, please. And then the town has agreed to put a truck with a plow as part of a warrant article through town. Next slide. These are our grants. I'm putting the figures in the FY22 budget and working with Michelle. She is not anticipating any significant change in funding for any of the grants. So you see our METCO grant, we have the IDEA special education, and the Early Childhood Special Education Grant. We have the various title grants, Title I at Village, the Title IIA grant that helps our mentors and curriculum frameworks, Title III, and Title IV. We have some revolving funds, the user fee revolving fund, $220,000. I know there has been some conversation about user fees as part of the FY23 budget. That is not part of my presentation this evening. Foreign tuition revolving, the guidance revolving, special education, preschool and kindergarten tuition, and then our building use and rental fees.
Is that it?
I think that's the last slide.
I think so too.
We'll go back to the questions. We can open it up for questions.
I'm going to stop the screen share.
Okay.
So this will open it up for the public comment portion of the meeting. So if you would like to comment or ask some questions of this budget, you can use the raise hand function. And I will ask that you say your full name and your address for the record as well. Jonathan Letterman, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Letterman, Edida Road. As a retired school committee member, I sometimes get calls from parents, teachers, and other members of the community who are concerned about school-related issues. Several weeks ago, my phone started ringing with calls about your proposed budget. So I tried to take a look at it and zoomed into your last two joint FinCom meetings. What FinCom told you very clearly was that your recurring budget adds beyond level services and your genuine needs were inadvisable, and that they would not support these adds. They were polite, but very insistent that you were putting the entire town's budget at risk, knowing what was coming in the following fiscal year. Next year's budget is going to be a real problem for the entire town, and they asked that you join them in focusing on next year, not this year. You've chosen to ignore their guidance. Therefore, I'm here today to address three issues. First, I'd like to ask you why you have not posted a full budget roll-up for public review. What you have put online is a budget supplement, not a budget. It only shows new line items and increases over the last year, but not if they are at risk if the supplemental budget amount you are proposing doesn't pass its referendum. For example, there's no line item in our superintendent's salary for our superintendent's salary, or for that matter, most of the line items from last year that are part of the more than $35 million foundational budget. Which items are in the foundational budget and which items are in the supplemental budget? Many of your new items could be supported in the existing budget without a supplement. This was always done during my more than a decade on the school committee and as recently as fiscal year 2020. We, as your constituents, have no reasonable way to assess the $46 million you are proposing to spend. And I believe as a result, you are out of compliance with Chapter 71, Section 38N of the Mass General Laws, which requires that you make a copy of your full budget public no fewer than 48 hours before this hearing. This is especially troubling because you didn't publish the full budget last year either. So we as a public are required to dig back through many previous years to even find out what you're proposing to spend in the foundational budget. This is the opposite of transparency. Second, I'd like to ask you a question about our school funding. What happens to our town budget if you choose to add benefits eligible but lower paid staff to our classrooms at $20,000 per year for each position? Do you realize that for these workers, their salaries represent less than half of the actual cost of their positions? And do you know that the other more than half of their costs comes in the form of benefits and retirement obligations? But those are actually paid from the town budget, not the school budget. This is a large part of the reason why our finance committee is so concerned about your proposed addition of administrators and especially so many lower paid but benefits eligible non-teaching staff. When we add a teacher at $80,000 per year, we pay benefits for just one person or their family, and we gain a professional who directly teaches a classroom full of students. But when four lower paid but benefits eligible staff like attendance clerks and permanent substitute teachers at $20,000 a year each are added, it is equivalent in salary, but 4 times the cost and benefits of hiring a higher paid teacher. But those costs hit the town budget, not the school budget. This completely derails our town budget, putting at risk the funding necessary for non-school needs such as police, fire, highway, and other town services. And since you aren't adding classroom teachers, does little to improve instruction or outcomes. Lastly, I'd like to address your claim that anything less than your proposed budget addendum increases would be cutting bone. That simply is not true. FinCom has fully funded contractual increases for all existing staff and all existing line items. It simply isn't reasonable to propose new spending that doesn't exist and then say cutting that same proposed new spending is a cut to the bone. Unfortunately, I had no way to analyze your base budget as you have chosen not to publish it. So instead, I focused on your supplemental budget additions, what you have decided to publish. Why have you decided that these new items are so essential to our schools? How do you know? I'd like to propose that one way to find out would be to do some benchmarking against other similar districts. Using federal census data and a great tool provided for free by the Massachusetts Department of Education called DART, it is very easy to compare Marblehead to other towns in terms of income and spending levels. Westford, for example, which ranks higher than we do, is very similar to Marblehead economically, yet they spend $2,000 less per student and rank significantly higher in all available measured academic outcomes. This is just one example, but a worthwhile place to start in terms of determining how other successful towns are spending their school dollars and why they're seemingly able to do so much more with so much less. Shouldn't we look at their budgets and see how they spend it so well and what they prioritize? You could and should have done this earlier. For years, we've been aware of the declining school enrollments in Marblehead. Yet you are proposing to add a new highly paid staff, several new highly paid staff who are not direct classroom teachers, as well as 12 or more lower paid but benefit eligible staff will add just as much to the town budget in terms of benefits as they cost for the entire salary. So just those staff alone add more than $1 million annually to the town budget forever. You need to go back to the drawing board and listen to the advice of our town's financial experts, our finance committee. You need to do real benchmarking against other comparable towns to find out where money should be best spent. And you need to publish a line item budget that shows that the best interests of our students, families, and community are being addressed. It's impossible to know what's in the budget if you don't publish it. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to any of that?
Sure. This budget for me represents what's in the best interest of Marblehead and its students. I consult with other districts, but our stakeholders have determined that these are what our students need. And so that, as the superintendent, is what I'm bringing forward for the students and residents of Marblehead. And so we are completely transparent. I can have Michelle send Mr. Letterman whatever documentation he is requesting, but this budget puts Marblehead first, not other communities.
So I totally understand that and I appreciate your response. The problem is
Muted, Jonathan.
So I guess I appreciate your comments, but I don't understand where the line item budget is. It has to, by law, it's supposed to be published 48 hours before this meeting. And looking at all of the documents, I came down to the admin building at Widger Road, looking at the line item budget, and they were very nice, but they didn't have it. And the fact that that hasn't been published every single year I was on the committee for 12 years and all the way through the late, from 2013 all the way through to 2020, we used to have a line item budget. We could look at individual line items. So a lot of the items that you guys are talking about, which are very important, and I agree with you, could belong in an existing budget. But instead, it's really hard to tell what's at risk, what's going to go on a referendum, and what's part of the base budget. There are lots of things that you have great ideas about, and I would support, and I think most members of the community support, but there are other items that might not be supported. And I think that there has to be a clear delineation about which items are going to make it onto the ballot and which items are we going to get regardless. And that hasn't happened. And I really think you're out of compliance with not publishing that budget. Without being able to see, I brought up the example of the superintendent's salary, not because I'm picking on that. Doesn't matter. Superintendents should be paid what they're worth, but it's not even in the budget that you presented. And normally you would expect you'd see the baseline budget, the previous year's budget, and what the growth is for all positions, not just the superintendent. You would look at principals, you'd look at teachers, you'd look at the step and lane increases, and they're just there in aggregates, and it's not clear where do they belong, which budget are they in? Are they in the supplemental or are they in the base? So I think that needs to happen in order to get support from the community, one way or another. People need to understand. And that, by the way, was supposed to happen 48 hours before this meeting.
Can we address that? Isn't this available?
Yeah, the detailed budget binder has been available on Widger Road since December 10th. I think, Michelle, can you speak to that?
Yes, our budget binders have been available since they were distributed to the school committee. We've had an office copy in the office. I actually added some final budget documents to them a couple days ago. So there is a copy in the superintendent's office that the admin assistant has available. The actual line item budget, I do want to reply to that because we do not break down the salary actual lines in the budget because we do have line item autonomy, and therefore, until we actually know the person in each particular position, that particular line item is going to fluctuate. So we do not determine that. So I don't want to put out, I mean, obviously the superintendent line item is not going to change unless we have a change in that position, but we do not put out the individual line items because those are going to fluctuate based on what school each teacher is assigned to. We still haven't gone through our staffing, if we have any staffing moves for next year. We certainly know we are not laying off any staff, but we do not know the actual allocation. So we do not put that out there so that we're putting out information that we know is not going to be correct as of July 1. So we roll up the prior year salary budget and carry that forward and then show you all the changes from there in terms of the salaries. In terms of every other line that's not a salary line, it is detailed in that document. So therefore, we're just not allocating 35 million. If you want the 35 million, I do have a report. It's exactly what the FY22 budget is. And therefore, the changes are listed below that on the budget summary document.
So
I can give the line item, but I'm going to tell you they're going to change before I actually post it for the new fiscal year.
So I totally understand that. And I know that you have a line item budget yourself as the budget director for the schools, but that document could have been released in its estimated form. That's what a budget is, right? So you could talk about grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 at each school for our elementary schools. You could talk about the village school, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, 5, and 6, right? I mean, that's normally how the budget document is done. And obviously there are different positions of different salary levels, but those are relatively in aggregate, well-defined, and those are part of the base budget. So here tonight, you're talking about a whole bunch of new spending, and some of that new spending could go into the base budget. Some of it can go into the supplemental budget, but it's not clear where anything belongs. So if I was to say to you, look, I think you have too many helper people, whatever you want to call them, and I use that as an example because I don't want to pick one category to pick on in one place, I could say, well, maybe you should spend, maybe our books, look, I 100% agree we need textbooks that cover 9/11 at the high school. That's a no-brainer, right? So that could belong somewhere in our textbook budget, but we don't know what the textbook budget is because that hasn't been published. So there are a whole bunch of line items that deserve public scrutiny that aren't available. Now, your point about coming down Widger Road, I did come down. Nobody had that. So this was yesterday, and you can, I spent a little bit of time down there and I said, do you have a copy of the budget binder? And it didn't seem like it was available. And if it is available, why leave it in a binder down there instead of just posting a PDF of it on the district website 48 hours in advance so everybody can take a look at it? I think that, to me, that is the budget that needs to be published, not just a narrative about these are the things we want and these are the things that we'd like to have and these are the things we need, and are they going to be at risk if they go on the ballot? Or are these going to be things we'll fund no matter what? I think no matter what happens, whether the referendum passes or not, we ought to have textbooks for world cultures at the high school that cover 9/11. I don't think that's something that should be at risk. So
absolutely. Just in response to that, I just want to let you know right now, the budget that we're putting forward is the one with the referendum, with the override, and all of those new items are additions to the budget. So if that does not pass at this time, we are planning on cutting those. We do not have any built-in savings from the current year budget because we do not have any retirements known for next year that are going to result in any attrition savings. So there are no necessary savings that we know we can reallocate to another place. So right now, pretty much on the chopping block, if this override is not to go forward, all of these new item requests that are listed in the detail.
So you're telling me that if the override doesn't pass, you're going to cut textbooks that cover 9/11 from next year's budget?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think you need to, we're asking the same questions over and over. So if you have any new questions, you can put them forward, but I don't want to have you.
Okay, I'll rephrase it and then I'll drop off and just watch. So what you're basically saying is that there is nothing in your existing budget that should be changed. Only the new things are at risk, and everything else that's in the baseline budget is basically flawless and isn't going to be adjusted in an aggregate budget amount.
That's the understanding right now. We may have a little bit of fluctuation and a little bit of ability, but there's not much wiggle room there.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to clarify that the budget documents were available. They've been in a binder at Widger Road, which has been past practice. And so people that wanted them could have access to.
Just one other thing, can you just reiterate, just to answer Jonathan's question about the benefits piece, because that was in your presentation for new employees, because we are covering that.
Yep.
We're not expecting the town to cover that.
That's correct. Yep.
I know I had Julia Vieira's hand up, but I'm not sure. Somebody put it down, or Julia, if you lowered it.
Really quick, I just want to confirm, and I think John just did confirm this, but because this is such a procedural thing. I just want to confirm the budget books we received is what, if someone went to Widger Road, they would look at, but correct? Like that the no difference. Like what we have, if someone goes there, is what they get. No difference whatsoever.
That is correct.
Yes, the only thing that has been added to there is the budget documents that were published on the website, but yes.
Okay.
Meredith Tedford.
Hi, all. I was just really curious to tune in. I wasn't actually planning on speaking tonight, but and I don't want to get into the minutia, and I don't know enough about the details of this year's budget to even be able to do that. But just bringing it back up to, oh, and I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't Meredith Tedford, 40 Locust Street.
Thank you.
I just want, like, bringing it up to 50,000 feet. I appreciate that there is even a discussion around bringing an override, and for those of you who were on the committee, and when I was on the committee a number of years ago, we were trying to have these conversations back then. So it's obvious that some of these needs have been, long overdue and ongoing. And I appreciate the effort that is being made to really advocate for what teachers and principals are asking for. And I think that's really important for the public to understand that these are not new requests in any way. They're things that have been deferred for many years. So, I'm personally very appreciative that the committee is willing to even have the conversation. But that said, from a sky high view, there is still the very real issue that Jonathan highlighted, which is this disconnect between the town's ability to actually continue to fund some of these auxiliary costs related to some of the override requests. And that conflict is only getting worse. So I think it might be helpful, especially for a lot of people watching who haven't maybe been following closely some of the subcommittee meetings. Can you kind of explain or clarify a little bit your plan moving forward to address this difference for both, next year's budget and ongoing, when it will get worse on the town side if there's not some big changes in the town budget overall?
Yep, I think the town is been very transparent and clear that they are going for an override next year. There's not a way around that to address the structural difficulties or disconnect or challenges in town. And so the interim town manager has repeatedly told me that the interviewing committee for the new town manager is making it very clear that the structural challenges in town will be one of the first issues that he or she faces. And I think the outgoing town administrator was very clear that if not this year, then definitely next year. And so those will continue to be collaborative conversations with the town and the school department. The school department is prepared to move forward this year and not wait another year for our children to have the exemplary education that they deserve. And in an ideal world, yes, we would be doing this together. But we have put these needs forward, and I'm not sure how we say we've made these known. And I would agree, Meredith has pointed out that these have been known, some of them. I go back to Matt Fox asking for a reading teacher last year and was giddy because after 8 years, he finally got it. That we're putting these things forward and to say them to our students and our teachers, but not this year. So that's why the school department, and under my recommendation, is moving forward this year with budget requests that we.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Nancy Smith?
Hi. I just have one quick question.
Can you just state your address really quickly?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you state your address really quickly? Thank you.
There. I just have a question about how you handle your school lunch program. I know it's kind of all part of the budget, but the school lunch program should really kind of be running itself. So there shouldn't be, that should be something that should be kind of like a relief, and you should be able to be, you know, taking like indirect costs against them for shared costs. How are you managing that program?
That's a great question, Nancy. I'm glad that you posed it. For the last 2 years, the lunch program has been under federal funding. That during the pandemic, they have been supporting school lunch programs. But I'm going to ask Michelle for historical information on the lunch program, how it figures.
So the
Right.
school lunch, the school lunch program is a federal program.
Yeah.
We can only spend those funds obviously on certain things. We do charge indirect costs to it. The only thing that that fund is not able to absorb is the food service director's salary.
Mhm.
So that is a line item within our operating budget. Other than that, it is a self-sustaining fund. It does cover the benefit costs of our employees and whatnot, and the retirement costs of our employees. So it is self-sustaining. We do not necessarily charge like any of my time, the business office clerk's time to it. We certainly could, but honestly, that fund has run very close to breaking even. It is not a fund that makes a lot of surplus revenues at the end of the year. So that's why we absorb the food service director's salary within the operating budget.
How do you market it to get more kids to participate in the program? Because I think that's a big issue for reimbursement. I used to audit for Jesse, so I know all about like the school lunch and how to run it like a business and everything. And we would go out and train them. So I'm trying to find ways where you can alleviate some of this burden by teaching these directors how to run it like a business. So even if it does break even, great, that's what you want. It's basically covering running the program. So it requires, you know, a lot of effort in how you market it, the type of food you buy, what you do. I've dealt with a lot of food service directors, like in the Milton Public Schools. She was wonderful. She'd get fresh fish every day. The kids were eating fresh fish, and she was running it really very well, so that it was really bringing in revenue to cover everything. They were able to, you know, bill reimbursement for everything. So that's something, you know, you can look at as a way to generate and really offset costs, because I know in the past, the school department has had trouble in Marblehead with the school lunch running in the red. And it's been, you know, it's been a rough one. So I think that's something, if you reach out to Desi, they could come out and, you know, do training, show them how to procure things, how to market it and things like that, and going to a lot of the trainings. You yourself could go to those trainings as well. So-
Absolutely. We are actually looking at closing this year with a surplus balance, so we are actually doing really well. But we always look to continue to how to increase participation, and that's something that will be
Right.
ongoing. And we're actually searching for a new food service director right now, so that will be
Right.
part of our interview process and you know, set up for the new year. So absolutely. So thank you for your
Great,
comments.
thank you.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate in the context of the public budget hearing, but since Michelle opened the door, Nancy, we can take this offline, but we are looking for a new food service director, and you might be a really good volunteer on the search committee. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to my office.
And Nancy, can I just get you to give us your address for the record?
55 Commercial Street. Sorry, I'm sorry, I should have said that first.
No worries. Thank you
Sorry.
very much.
Sarah, if
Yeah.
I might. And I know when we were, it's hard to talk about it because, you know, we've had the federal lunch program for the last 2 years, but going back before that, the last few years, I'm kind of embarrassed to say those numbers are still stuck in my head. I don't quite know why, but we always self-funded that, with the exception of, like Michelle said, the food service director, and there was always a tiny line item, like $8,000 for, those were the students at the end of the year had unpaid balances, which we would have to zero out. But, and that's going back 2 or 3, 4 years prior to that. It was always level funded. And again, I'm a little embarrassed that I still know that $8,000 figure in my mind from all the way back then. But it in the scope of things, that's pretty self-funded, I would say.
Thank you, Nancy. Jessica Benedetto?
Hi, Jessica Benedetto, 8 Bradley Road. I similarly to Mr. Letterman's comment, I am a little confused about the budget on hearing this presentation. And again, I want to specifically refer to busing as an item within the budget. I know that part of the budget was to ask for an additional bus driver. And it seems like from the presentation that that additional bus driver is part of the additional asks that we're looking at doing an override for. However, the bus driver position was part of the budget from last year, so it's really not additional. We're already down 1 bus driver, and it looks like we're trying to pay them more, which I applaud. That's a really positive thing. However, it doesn't seem like that's an additional ask if we were down a bus driver from last year. As a parent, that was part of the pay to ride program for elementary school students this year. I can give you my feedback for free without having to pay for an audit. I can tell you that a busing system, which is, by the way, required from the state for students who are more than 2 miles from school, a busing system that takes kids all the way around Marblehead Neck before going to Old Town, before getting them to their house, which takes more than an hour to get 1.5 miles from Village School to our residents. I can tell you that that is not an efficient system. And adding 1 additional bus driver that we're short, hopefully will remedy that system, but it will not do anything to actually improve the number of students that we bus in this town. And it won't do anything to try to bus any students beyond grade 6 that are not mandated by the state to be bused. I've spoken to several members of this community, including older people that grew up in Marblehead, who have told me that students used to be bused to middle school and high school if they lived 2 miles or more from school. And that is something that was cut out of previous budgets. And that's something that we need to think about bringing back for families in this town with working parents, to decrease the number of single-use cars that are idling during school pickup and drop-off times. This will help the environment, it will help working families, and this should be something that is prioritized in our budget.
John, do you want to address the bus driver piece?
Yeah, I saw Michelle unmuted, so I'll let
Okay.
Michelle.
Thank you. So we do currently have 2 vacant bus driver positions, one full-time and one part-time in this current budget. We also are asking for an additional ad for next year. So the bus drivers in the current year budget request that remain vacant would help alleviate the current busing situation and the length of time. Right now, we only have 2 bus drivers in the afternoon. Sometimes some parents may have noticed that we've had to double up on some of our bus runs, which is not convenient. It takes a long time for a short number of kids to make it home after school. The additional bus driver for next year's budget for the FY23 would be for the pay to ride program specifically, so we can expand that program. So that is why you see a vacancy this year, and you also see an ad for next year.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jessica. Jeff St. George.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Jeff St. George, 29 West Shore Drive. I'll be quick as possible. So, as a special education parent, our concern is the lack of new special education personnel, professional development, and the absence of its specific mention in our strategic objectives. It just seems pretty glaring considering the out-of-district tuition spending. My biggest concern is that I feel like our team chairs caseloads are too large. Our specialists have too many students, and inclusion does not exist with kids with complex IEPs. As we push forward with our DEI efforts, which I fully support, the challenge with student challenges get left behind in these discussions. A special education parent, I feel like many academic and therapeutic programs are available, exist, and can help kids in this district and keep kids in healthy peer groups. The idea of an override for special education parents had always meant that these programs and additions could finally implemented and our children could finally feel like all other students. I would implore you to re-examine your ask for the student services portion of the budget. I would ask that our district finally work towards the long-promised modern co-taught model. The model would save our district money in the long term and bring us closer to meeting our equity goals. While I fully support the DEI coordinator, I struggle with the budget allocation to that if we're not supporting the special education support. As an example, seriously, we're involved in the district heavily. We all know that Dan Bauer is a proven successful administrator, despite his underfunding. Our high school turns out some of the best and brightest students in the state. When Dan Bauer needs curriculum coaches, I'm concerned why we didn't provide them. I think this should be a district priority. I ask that we fund the curriculum coaches position as part of the FY23 funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. John, did you have anything to add on that, or can I move to the next person?
I would want to give Paula Donnelly an opportunity if she has anything that she would like to in terms of the request put forward by the Special Services Department.
Sure. Thank you. So thank you, Jeff, for the feedback. It's not, certainly it can often feel that staffing is a major issue. And I know that many of the headlines for the year have been the challenges with finding people to fill open positions. But one of the things that I've been looking at this year, and what I would want to point out, is that on balance across the district, we do have incredibly favorable teacher to student ratios. So just for teachers, tutors, and paraprofessionals across the district, we have a 5.1 student to staff ratio just for special education students. When you add in all of our related service providers, that ratio is 3.7 students to every special education staff member. I feel that we have a wealth, like an embarrassment of riches in some ways when you just look at the numbers of the highly qualified, incredibly talented staff. I think where it can feel inefficient and feel overwhelming is when it gets into looking at schedules and looking at how we're allocating staff across the buildings and across the course of their day. So, I do certainly agree that we want to promote as much co-teaching as possible. We do want to continue to ensure that we're maximizing all of the authentic, genuine, inclusive opportunities that we can for kids with complex needs. So a lot of the funding around professional development would be grant funded. That's why it's not a particular line item in this budget. That's why it wasn't an ask for me, kind of knowing that, there are always going to be fiscal challenges, but I do feel that in terms of purely the number of staff, that we've got a ton of really great people, and we want to continue to look at how we use those people effectively and efficiently.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. And it certainly wasn't a comment about the ability or professionalism of our staff.
No, certainly not. And I didn't.
Trust me,
interpret it as such.
I'm well aware of how well they do for my daughters. So that was not the intent at all. I just want to make sure that we're supporting children as much as possible. Again, I love the DEI efforts. I just want to make sure we're allocating funds where they are most needed.
Yep. And I think that a huge thing to remember is that disability is part of any DEI initiative. So supporting DEI does mean supporting students with disabilities as well.
Sure. So can we talk about, I know Mr. Bauer had asked for a couple of curriculum support coaches at the high school, which I didn't see on the budget. Was there a decision made on that, or it's just not seeing it?
I think that Emily had met with Dan Bauer last week and talked about reintroducing curriculum liaisons rather than two director or coordinator positions. But the DEI piece was voted by the committee, and David had brought up a stipend that isn't reflected in this budget. I assume that after the public budget hearing, if there are changes that are going to be proposed by the committee, they would take it up before their vote on the April 7th meeting.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate all your help.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paula. Kim Day.
Kim Day, 18 Liberty Road. I also want to thank you all for taking a look at this budget and being willing to put forth potentially an override this year, because as Meredith mentioned earlier, there are a lot of items on here that have been needs for several years. And so I am encouraged to see that some of these asks are being incorporated. You may have just answered my question, Dr. Bucky, with relation to the curriculum directors at the high school. I think that when I started to dig into this proposed budget, while I'm encouraged by a lot of the items, I questioned some of the others and why there were priorities given to things such as the DEI position over the curriculum directors at the high school. I mean, it used to be positions that were held at the high school, and then they were cut from the budget when we had to make tough calls and make some cuts. And they have not been brought back. And every year the answer is, this just isn't the year. So while I also fully support DEI, I wonder why we didn't evaluate looking into having a consultant in that role instead of hiring like a full-time position where, as Jonathan Letterman indicated, the town would then be taking on the benefits that and the insurance that would have to cover that individual. And why can't we do what potentially other towns are doing to get that DEI instruction incorporated into the schools by working with other surrounding communities and collectively hiring a consultant to get some of those initiatives started into the schools. So I guess, I just want to make sure that the school department and the school committee is being really, really thoughtful about these asks. Not that you haven't done a ton of work to date, but I think I'm just really anticipating the uphill battle that you're going to have in convincing voters as to why we need to support this override, if in fact that's what you end up having to take to town meeting in May.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Julia?
Hi, thank you. Sarah, as an employee, I was wondering if this would be an appropriate time. I'd like to comment on the diversity, equity, and inclusion position.
I believe this would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm Julia Ferreira, a member of our district's diversity, equity, and inclusion team. And I'm here regards to the proposed budget item for DEI director. As outlined in our plan for success, we want to promote equity and ensure inclusion by acknowledging and embedding all forms of diversity throughout the district. We've made great strides to promote equity and ensure inclusion through the work we've done and the professional learning opportunities we've offered this year. However, there's more work to do, as evidenced by the recent incidents in our schools and our society. I believe the real work that is happening at the school level is progressing because of the relationships our team has with our students and staff. Most recently, we successfully established school-based DEI teams to help build capacity, yet I fully acknowledge that there's much more work to do, much more work ahead of us. If the DEI director's position is approved, I envision working with a colleague who has established relationships within our community, as well as deep subject matter knowledge, who will promote inclusion and equity inside and outside the classroom in order to advance our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Emily D.
Hi, everyone. Emily DeWitt, 154 Atlantic Ave. Thank you very much for having a hearing forum tonight that both takes questions and answers them. We really appreciate that. I think a lot of things that are our concern have been covered. If I could lend my voice to the chorus, echoing the need for Dan Bauer's request for curriculum support. I would like to do that now. The curriculum support is, to me, a priority in this budget. And I'm not trying to slight any other budget priority, but at this time, I find it is an ask that keeps being brought forward year after year, and the need is very high. And I just wanted to voice that is a priority for our family. I know it's a priority for many other families. And I just saw a line through it on the budget that was published. And I didn't know if that line meant that it says these will be further defined for a future budget, but I wasn't clear on that exactly, if that was just totally taken off the table. The slides at the end of your show went sort of quickly there at the end, and I didn't catch if I missed something or if that's just totally taken out of the budget. So thank you for clarifying.
Yep. As I indicated, Emily met with Dan Bauer and the need for two directors. He thinks that he can fill that with existing personnel that already have established relationships within the building, or known as colleagues to do some curriculum work. Rather than teach 5 classes, maybe they teach 3. And so there would be a revised budget ask for that would be brought forward.
So the line through the amount on the budget proposal is just meant to indicate that it's not off the table, it's just being refined.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Kim Day, you have your hand raised again. Did you need to?
I just kept it up because I don't think anybody answered my question related to, did you look into filling that position for a DEI coordinator by working with other school districts or by hiring a consultant versus a full-time employee? And can you explain a little bit more about like what that role actually is and how they are going to be incorporated on a day-to-day basis and be student facing or working with the teachers? Like how is that position going to work exactly?
Yeah, we explored several models, and we thought bringing a director on board was the best choice for our district. And we, as Julia indicated, we've had ongoing DEI work at the district level and then at school-based teams, and having someone come in as a director to support this work. I will ask Nan Murphy, who is on the DEI team, to talk a little bit about their efforts and why we decided as a director position as opposed to making it something less or not as important as a director level position.
Great. I'm happy to. I also want to, I see one of my colleagues on the DEI team, Maggie Dobin's hand up too. So I'm sure she's going to have some thoughts on this because this has been actually this position was the topic of our last meeting together. And I think it was Julia that said this position, really our vision for it is grounded in relationships. And so as you talk about student facing work, a consultant cannot provide that. Consultants come in and they provide the professional development to the adults, and then the adults are trusted to carry out that work during the academic day. And the adults on the DEI team, we all have our own roles and responsibilities during the academic day. So we really are looking for someone to join our team and be part of our team, and then be able to operationalize what we envision for students and for that collaborative partnership in the classroom for teachers, that support to come to the student level. So I'm gonna let Maggie talk a little bit about that as well, because we just talked about this together as a team. Is that why your hand is up, Maggie?
That was why my hand was up.
Okay.
And I mimic all of the things that both Julia and Nan have mentioned here. I also want to say that something that a consultant can't do is know the culture and climate of our district. And knowing Marblehead and being intimately connected with our students and our faculty is something that makes that position unique to having an in-house person. You cannot achieve that as a consultant who's seeing things at a distance, who's traveling between districts. It's just not feasible to do that. With a plan for success written as it is, with DEI as an important component, the only way we can achieve this successfully and to the highest level of success is to have somebody who can oversee all of that. And many people have addressed looking at curriculum consultants and coaches tonight. And that is also something that would be part of the job of a DEI person, would be looking at the curriculum, the scope and sequence, pre-K to 12, and making sure that the curriculum choices we're making are diverse, are inclusive, are equitable. That they would be overseeing all of that and helping teachers then get that new curriculum and understand how to implement it at the classroom level. So this is a very student-facing position, I think, and probably one that's going to bring people into many classrooms, getting to know and support our students. And as Paula also mentioned, inclusion is a huge part of DEI work. It's one of the 3 initials of DEI. And so I don't want that to be overlooked, that it's just about race and LGBTQ issues, which I think is a misnomer about what DEI does.
No, I appreciate that. I haven't heard that level of detail before, and that context is helpful. So thank you.
Maggie, can you just talk a little bit about how DEI and SEL come together? Because I know we are talking about that and what that can do for our district also.
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to have a really successful DEI program, it needs to be systemic. And again, that's something that an in-house DEI person can work on. It's not something that's separate from, it is infused and part of the fabric of who we are. SEL is part of DEI. In order to have effective DEI work, you have to be empathetic. Empathy is one of CASEL's 5 core competencies. So if you don't understand SEL, then DEI can never happen. It's about being self-aware and recognizing who you are as a person and what you bring to your classroom, and what, I'm also a parent. Those are all the things that we're worried about our children right now. And this language, I think, are buzzwords in the educational community. But I also heard someone say tonight, why are we doing this? We are the last district in this immediate area to look at a DEI position. And yet we're Marblehead. We should be cutting edge. That's what everyone here is saying tonight. We want to be at the top. And we're lacking something that's bringing us to the top that has potential to make us better. And so to me, it seems like a very essential component of making a better educational program for our children. And I do think there's a big infusion, a big braiding of SEL and DEI. It is impossible to have a successful program of either one without interweaving them.
Thank you, Maggie. Nancy Smith, you have your hand back up.
Hi, Nancy Smith, 55 Commercial Street. I just have, talking about this DEI person, Maggie giving a little bit more detail about it. I am seeing a little bit more of the necessity of it, but at the same time, what I'm concerned about, you know, in today's world is the bullying that goes on with a lot of our children now in their identity and this new culture of how they're identifying themselves as non-binary and different things. And I think, will this position address that as well? Will that be part of it? Because that too, I think, involves educating the students on inclusion and acceptance and diversity and understanding, because when they head off to college, especially at the high school level, they're going to be thrust into a lot of diversity in the college level. And the college level university, they deal with this all the time and address it. So that's where I'd like to see how that is going to be. And, you know, starting in the middle school, elementary, because I'm seeing these kids really at a younger age being very, very angry, I guess is the word, and very mean, more so than, you know, when I was a kid growing up. And I think that's where I'm asking, is this gonna be part of this DEI, you know, team? Is this gonna be addressed as well? Because I think that's a major, major component that's gonna filter into that as well.
Absolutely. That will be a critical piece of, it is a piece of the DEI work being done across the district now to make sure that our schools are safe and welcoming for all students and that they're free of bullying and harassment. But the director position would be a critical piece of that at the district level. And then, as Maggie so astutely pointed out, getting into the classroom, because we do see it as a student-facing position as well.
And if I can just add to that, to mimic what Dr. Bucky is saying, and yes, and that is, again, thank you, Nancy, for bringing that up, because that is the SEL piece of DEI. You just outlined it. If we don't learn to be self-aware and we don't learn to develop empathy in our youngest children, they don't grow up to have that. And what a shame that right now, I actually had to leave one event hosted by Marblehead to be here tonight, because right now, just ending, was an LGBTQ event that was intended to help boost the empathy of our town and understand our student body and how we can best support them. And another thing that a DEI person would do would be make sure that there's not conflict in all of the areas of our school that we want for our faculty and staff and families to be a part of. The fact that I had to decide is an issue in and of itself.
Thank you, Mike. I don't think I see any other hands.
Correct. I do not see any other hands as well. So I would like to thank everyone who has attended tonight And thank you, Dr. Bucky, for the explanation of all of the additions to the budget and where it's at this year. Again, we will be meeting next week for a regularly scheduled school committee meeting, at which point we will deliberate and a vote on this budget will be on the agenda. So, you know, we encourage people to continue to reach out this week via email, you know, or I know, Dr. Bucky, there was a few emails you were answering today about meeting with people. So, you know, people are encouraged to reach out to us as we would like to hear from everyone. I actually have one more hand up now. Alexis Singer.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, couldn't get it to raise. Two things. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for the update on the high school and taking a look at the curriculum requests there, having a high schooler, Alexis Singer, 20 Cheever Avenue, having a high schooler and also a village student. And I really appreciate taking a look at that again. And just wanted a quick question. I wanted to see if someone can just clarify the social studies curriculum at the village school, well, I guess specifically K through 6. That curriculum is not in this budget request. Can someone just verify that for me?
That is correct.
Okay. And is that under any potential discussion, or is that something that's being pushed off to a later date?
I'll let Nan speak to that.
That's a great question. The work that we're doing at this time aligned to our plan for success. This year is dedicated for teachers to be going through their scope, developing a scope and sequence. The District of Marblehead does not currently have one. So we are constructing one at this time. We are almost there where we now will be able to say Marblehead has a K through 12 scope and sequence, which is an enormous amount of work that the teachers and building leaders have done in small teams throughout this year. Next year's work is looking at that scope and sequence and aligning where we are expected to be by the state standards, and then looking at our materials and what we need to align to that instruction. So next year, through the plan for success, we'll be developing those curriculum maps and aligning the materials. And so maybe by the budget time next year, maybe we'll have a sense of whether that is a priority. It will depend on other alignments and pieces that are either in place or not in place. But it's definitely going to be coming down the road. In the meantime, we are we're developing teacher created materials that are aligned to the scope and sequence, so that we're backfilling a gap that's been in the district for a bit. But next year going into it, we will have resources for teachers to use will be aligned to the scope and sequence. And then we're also looking at piloting a program right now that's being offered through DESE for 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. So teachers are looking at that proposal at this time to see if we can get some teams and DESE to approve us. That is an application process, but we are in the process of applying for that to look at that curriculum and be able to pilot that. So it is a good question. I think since I've been here, we have made some really tremendous shifts in the materials and resources that we've provided our staff, and they've done a tremendous job. K through 12, adopting a new math program. We are implementing a new writing program. We have a new data assessment. So now we're having data chats and conversations about using data to drive instruction. To bring forward an entire new curriculum and ask for that in this budget to be implemented for next year, I feel would be disingenuous to our teachers who have just endured 2 years of a pandemic and have made many shifts in instruction and in curriculum and materials and expectations. I just don't think we have the bandwidth to do that well. So, and it's not completely aligned yet to the plan that we're putting forward for the district that will carry us for many years.
Okay, thank you. I know I appreciate that explanation and understand the part of the creating the scope and sequence first. And I think just obviously this falls into all of the other concepts that you guys have discussed tonight. And it would be, yeah, great to have that align with the other, programs that you're trying to pull together and to make this a complete whole. So thank you. Thanks for the update on that.
Thank you, Alexa. Emily DeWitt, I see your hand is raised again.
Hi, yes. Thank you for taking one last question. I don't mean this in any way to be flippant. I'm just trying to figure out why the ask is happening, particularly at this moment for a DEI director.
But I think the case has been made clear repeatedly this evening of the need for this work in the district. And I think Maggie was very articulate when she said many area surrounding districts have this. And as is often pointed out, this is Marblehead and we are different. And to make it a binary choice of no DEI director or curriculum coordinators, I don't see it that way. I think that it is important work. If we see some of the incidents that have occurred in the district over the last couple months, principals putting out messages of things that aren't inclusive, that aren't respectful of diversity, that don't make safe and welcoming schools, I'm not sure how we could question the need for such a position in the district and not to diminish it to the role of a consultant.
So it's being put above curriculum.
That is not correct. It's not a binary choice between curriculum or DEI.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Oh, so let's see, so the DEI director also does curriculum work. I don't know if that was said before, but that's part of the responsibility to make sure that our curriculum is, includes everything it should include. So that is a huge part. So it's not like we're saying one or the other. And we're also talking about adding back in the curriculum directors at the high school, but just in a different way that Dan Bauer actually suggested. So I just want to get that clear. It's all curriculum.
Thank you, Emily. Sorry. All right, I do not see any further hands raised, so I will close our budget public hearing at 8:33 p.m. And I will just one more time remind everyone that we will be back next week at the same time. And I believe we're pulling off a hybrid meeting again, hopefully. And that would be when the school committee debates the budget, discusses it, and hopefully votes on it. So thank you for your time tonight, everyone. And I will adjourn us also at 8:33 p.m.